Yes, I tell you, it was a sad day on Saturday. All hope seemed to be lost.
Is Martin Luther King back from the grave?
Representatives were thrown out of the state house. Democracy seemed to be at its end.
Is this guy's authentic voice?
Seemed like the NRA and gun lobbyists might win.
Or is he just doing an impersonation? I have my friend Chad O. Jackson joining to react to this video that went viral on social media and to talk about the new hero of the Democratic Party. Should be a fun one. Show starts now.
But oh, that was good news for us. I don't know how long this Saturday in the state of Tennessee might last.
It's the Dream Rare Podcast. Welcome to the show. The way to get the news at the desk or on the road. Let's go. God is great and success in our control. The world is crazy, but we get better from obstacles.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Dream Rare Podcast live. I had a dream that one day I'd have Chad O. Jackson back on the stream, and today is that day.
Today's that day that all the little black boys and all the little black girls can come together and have podcasts like this.
That's
very grateful to be here with you, An0maly. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure too. I got a few other clips. I'm trying so hard not to get copyright stricken. Every time I play news clips now, they'll try to like take all my revenue. But you know, so I'm chopping them into smaller clips, and I want to get our reaction to it. So here's Justin Pearson, potentially Martin Luther King of our era.
But oh, we have good news, folks. We've got good news that Sunday always comes. Resurrection is a promise.
Do you think that's his real voice?
Joke.
Like he talks like that at the grocery store?
It's not his voice at all. He sounds like me, actually. If you hear him talk like in an interview, he sounds just like me. And then like too, when you listen to interviews that Martin Luther King had in the 60s, he had a very thick kind of Southern accent. You know what I mean? And so it's like there is no distinguishable difference between him giving an interview and him giving a speech. The only difference was he was more amplified and more, louder than his normal talking voice. Whereas this guy, it's a clear night and day difference that you're trying to kind of channel your inner Martin Luther King in order to give this speech. And, I don't think anybody took it seriously, but it's interesting to see once again, this kind of disconnect between the media and the general public, because they're treating it like this is like he's the next greatest thing. And like he's this big rock star. In reality, everybody's just kind of like confused about the whole situation.
I got one more clip, bro. Hold on. I'm going to play this clip of it.
And it is a prophecy. It's a prophecy that came out of the cotton fields. It's a prophecy that came out of the lynching tree. It's a prophecy that still lives.
Yeah.
Like what? Did you see that lady to his right?
No,
I don't know if you have the ability to like put like a still image of that video.
I'm gonna play it again. I'm gonna look this time. Here,
okay.
Let me play it again.
And it is a prophecy. It's a prophecy that came out of the cotton fields. It's a prophecy that came out of the lynching tree. It's a prophecy that still lives.
She's confused too.
The dude next to him too, like no one's smiling, no one's like shaking their head like, that's true. She's like, she's probably thinking like, I just talked to you 10 minutes ago, and you're like, yo, can you pick me up a coffee from the Wawa? She's like, yeah, sure. And he's like, and then I got it. And she's like, I swear he didn't have that voice when we were just talking about coffee.
No, that's what I mean. Like nobody's taking this seriously, except for the media, who are disseminating this kind of information and basically trying to invoke a feeling among the general public. This is how heroes are made. It's certainly how Martin Luther King was made into a hero by the leftist kind of mainstream publications of his day. He was on the face of Time magazine and Life magazine and all the others, saying that this is the new Negro who can bring intellectual dynamism to the South. And so it's nothing more than just, dusting off that old playbook and reutilizing it here in the 21st century.
Cab, I don't know how to say that. Some user on YouTube said she wants to be beamed up. Talking about that lady. Like she's like, beam me up, yo, get me out of here. I wasn't following it too closely because,
Yeah.
there's always something going on. And
Mhm.
I just was laughing so hard at that video. So let me just read like exactly what happened. The screams in the gallery didn't quiet. This is a News Channel 5. Didn't quiet as Justin Pearson, representative, was the second lawmaker expelled from the legislature on Thursday. Members stayed in the House 9 hours. Pearson's proceedings lasted for 2 hours. What happened? He interrupted actual like a government process, like illegally or something. Is that the deal?
Yeah, they were getting ready to vote on a bill. I think it was House Bill 311 or something like that. It was a bipartisan bill that basically ramps up school safety, and I think there's money allocated for resource officers, armed resource officers, money allocated for training, active shooter training, all sorts of things. And what this group of three lawmakers were upset about, and a lot of the protesters that were outside of the House were upset about, was that they didn't believe that the bill gets to the root cause of quote unquote gun violence. When in reality, I don't think that the root cause is something that the government can, handle in the first place. The root cause starts in the home. But again, this is yet another example of how these kind of Marxian politicians, and you know, I, don't get it twisted. People like Justin Pearson and Justin Jones, they are backed by the Communist Party of America. I mean, this is well documented. Um, Pearson, in particular, he is part of the Poor People's Campaign, which has a huge endorsement from the Communist Party USA. And so these are tried and true communist tactics where you try to invoke rage and emotion in people by treating this, because basically, yes, to answer your first question, they're having house session, and what these guys did is they took to the well uh, without permission from the House Speaker, and they basically disrupted an orderly House session, and that's actually that goes against the constitutional limits of the state representatives, and so as such, they were reprimanded and voted to be expelled from the House. So I think it served them well.
Yeah, and I understand everybody has opinions, but when there's a house thing in session and you interrupt that, I guess
Mhm.
that's the what they did. I saw Julius. His name is Today with Julius on Instagram and Twitter. A friend of mine that I follow. He had posted your. I guess you had an intro to one of G. Edward Griffin's older. I forget the name of it. The Anarchy one. What's it called?
Anarchy USA.
Right. There's
Mhm.
a you posted on YouTube on one of your channels with a forward by you, and he
Mhm.
was mentioning that a lot of these tactics that have been around that G. Edward was talking about then are still being used. And one of them that I remember was making the public feel like something's popular through media manipulation when it's not really popular. So can you talk about the similarities between that film and what's happening, and also do you think this guy, because I know there's going to be people who like him, right?
Mhm.
But like, is he really popular? Because if I'm left wing, right, say I hate Republicans, I'm super left wing, and he gets up there, I'm still going to be like, nah, I don't know. That seems a little extra. But
Yeah.
do people really like him, or are they just making the public perception feel that way?
It's certainly the latter. They're making the public perception because up until 2 seconds ago, nobody knew who he was. And it wasn't, like you said, until this video went viral that all of a sudden you see this funny looking dude with an afro and a dashiki who sounds like Martin Luther King, and all of a sudden you're supposed to think he's some kind of American hero. When in reality, that's not the case. My friend Keisha King made the point to say that this isn't just some, kid who is causing a fuss. This is part of an agenda, and that agenda is to emotionalize America to such a degree that we are willingly giving up our guns. And the fact is, these people are taking advantage of the ignorance of the American people, namely that we don't have a true understanding of our own history, first and foremost, and secondarily world history. Namely that in 1917, when uh, the communists took over Russia, the first thing they did, or one of the first things that they did, was they banned guns. If you were not an active member of the Communist Party, you couldn't own a weapon. And what they did was they uh, referenced um, gun license records, to see who among the Russian population owned guns, and they use that information to go and confiscate weapons from the Russian people. And we all know what happened after the fact. And so, in every kind of authoritarian regime, something similar to that has happened. And so, we as 21st century Americans think it's far fetched that the government can ban weapons and basically use that against us downstream of having banned those weapons. And so, to answer your question, yes, this is certainly a playbook out of the kind of things that we see in Anarchy USA, where they were using kind of slandering rhetoric to demonize their political opponents, to make them look like bigots, to make them look like, old-fashioned kind of people who are behind the times, who are on the quote unquote wrong side of history. And it's to the extent that you can win in the court of public opinion. In other words, convince the masses of society that you're on the right side and these other people are on the wrong side of history. You can emotionalize them, and it's to that degree that you can get anything passed that you so wish. And I feel that Justin Pearson is part of that larger agenda.
I think the gun thing in America with the gun ownership, it's one thing that Democrats, although they've tried, there's a lot of campaigns, etc. It seems like it's something that they just can't crack. Even in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of big rulings in favor of gun owners in California, in states like Florida with DeSantis. I think he just did some sort of carry law, made it legal. And even in California, a judge ruled and put it in the right direction. So they seem like they really can't crack the Second Amendment. They're really desperately trying. And it's so obvious why that's important in America. You look at other countries where they took it away. And also just the lockdowns. I know during the lockdowns, a lot of people who never thought about owning a gun or didn't care about guns, they were like, maybe I should own one, because if I'm going to be locked in my house, and something is very ominous about that. So I don't think they're even though, honestly, I don't think Justin Pearson is like a top 5 best thing that they've done. Like, it's a funny clip, but I don't think it's as convincing as maybe some other things they've done over the last decade. I don't think it's going to work. But no matter how much they try, no matter how many tragedies there are, it does seem like gun ownership and gun rights are one of the only things in America that they haven't been able to really break.
Right. No, you're right. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of which is that there's still this large segment of the American population that believes in the sanctity of the Second Amendment on the one hand. There's people like yourself who have been kind of sounding the alarm of this kind of global agenda. And as people listen to people like you, and are made aware of what's going on, one, with our own government, and two, around the world, the thought that comes to mind for many is, well, how can I safeguard myself and my family in the event that something pops off? Ultimately, I'm one person. I will definitely be overpowered in, you know what I mean?
Right.
In some, grand conspiracy or what have you. But the least I can do is make sure that I'm paying attention to what's going on with my money, what's going on with our food, and basically have the immediate means to protect myself if somebody comes knocking down my door or what have you. And so there's that segment of the society that insists on keeping their guns. But then you have this growing population of, again, ignorant people, the people that you saw protesting with the signs and all the things, who are operating from pure emotion, who believe that the way to stop crime is to ban guns. And the question becomes, who ultimately will win out in terms of legislation? Will it be this segment of the population who believes genuinely that the way to stop crime is to get rid of the guns, or will it be the people who understand the necessity of the Second Amendment?
People in the comments are calling themselves ammo-sexuals. I'm all for the Second Amendment, but please do not sexualize your ammo. It's a little far for me. I'm a traditionalist.
Little much.
Pretty funny though. I'm just kidding. But also seriously, lay off. Don't do that. Keep it between. We want to keep a godly marriage here. But anyway, with the taking away rights and the people who want to do that, there's this old clip of I used to film for Flecka's, and when he used to do the street, and we used to go to like the Women's March in LA together, have a great time. And people used to ask me, you guys, you must take a lot of interviews and try to like frame it that way. And because I filmed for him, I saw, honestly, it was like 10 for 10. Obviously, we looked for people that wanted to interview, and if someone looked funny, we try to go for them. But it wasn't like we interviewed 50 people and only picked like the 5 craziest ones. It was like everyone there was legitimately kind of like insane, and we didn't have to try that hard. So there's this clip that he brought back. I was in it because he filmed me saying it. And she was basically saying she wanted to like take away guns. And then I was like, a wise man told me today, which was true. Somebody told me this in the streets. He's like, that we used to protest in America for our rights. And now we're protesting to take our rights away. Or it's like, you know, back in the day, it was like, we want more rights. And now it's like, we want less rights. And it is a very interesting paradox there.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's like, gone are the days where people actually think for themselves. Don't get me wrong. I do think that a lot of people who advocate for free speech are disingenuous. I do think that that can be kind of overplayed. For example, and this might be like a little bit off course, but a lot of people get upset that, you know, Facebook and YouTube are censoring people, and I get that because they are, and it's frustrating, especially if you are a content creator, you're trying to get your voice out there, you're trying to grow your numbers, and it's frustrating that, you know, YouTube and IG and all these others are trying to advance voices that are, you know, trying to spread transgenderism and all the other things. They're trying to basically promote those voices for free while at the same time shadow banning other voices that are just talking about what's going on in the world. So that's frustrating. So I get it, but at the same time, I'm a big believer that if you start a business, that's your business and you can do with it whatever you please. The First Amendment is more for the government, as far as I'm concerned, unless I'm misunderstanding it. It's more against the government trying to censor speech more so than individual or private or even public companies trying to censor speech. The problem is that the government is actively involved with these big tech companies and silencing people. And so it's to that extent that it's unconstitutional. But to bring it back to the point I was originally trying to make with regard to speech. Well, actually, I forgot the point.
It's all good.
I forgot it.
Yeah, no, I'll say this with yeah, I hear you on the First Amendment, and I think conservatives have started to make alternatives. Rumble's doing well. Honestly, the Truth Social and Getter, the way they like cut it both ways, that was stupid. They should have just picked one. But in general, you know, people have gotten around to compete with them. Like you said, the fact that the government was going to Twitter because Elon bought it, we know that, trying to silence people through Twitter. I'm almost positive, you know, I'm not going to say for sure because I don't have the evidence because there are no Facebook files, but because my Facebook page is so huge and I got almost 800 million views, I believe that, you know, this was not organic because I wasn't even breaking rules where when I would reach out, they couldn't even say I was doing, because I'm very smooth with how I present things and I don't just share things I can't prove. They were shutting down like New York Times article because it wasn't, and I'm like, what the hell? So I have a hard time thinking that was organic. I think somebody was kind of pressuring them to take it down, but we'll see.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about mental illness and red flag laws real quick, because I know Dan Crenshaw years ago got a lot of flack from Republicans because, you know, Dan Crenshaw's like, I'm your friend, I'm just like you. But then he's like, red flag laws, oh, everything's anti-Semitic. You know, he like kind of floats around, and people were like, no, you know, I understand that if someone's super mentally ill and insane, you don't want them owning a gun, obviously. But how do we know what the government's going to call mentally ill? Because they could call a veteran mentally ill. They could call you mentally ill. Your wife could get mad at you or your girlfriend, and they could determine. So it's a very fine line. And here's an interesting one that's come up recently because of the transgender shooting, is now a lot of Republicans that were against red flag laws are now being like, yeah, I don't think trans people should own guns. And then Blair White and Ben Shapiro kind of had a little disagreement because Blair said, you know, how do you know that they're not going to open that to you? You know, like, where do you draw the line? So what do you think about that? Because I understand that people that are super insane shouldn't own guns, But do we want to give the government that power to call half the country mentally ill?
I think that there is a kind of chasm uh, between the side of conservatism where people are just interested in roasting the libs or owning the libs, as it were, and the people like yourself who are only interested in the truth and the facts. And as such, the people on this side who are only interested in owning the libs are going to often say things that are inconsistent, that are contradictory to other statements that they've said, so on and so forth. Because to Blair White's point, what is to stop them from opening or expanding that to you? They're already saying that militia groups, regardless of what their ideology are quote unquote white supremacist, because as we know, as the Second Amendment reads, well organized militias or something like that. And so you have a lot of groups here in the United States who started a well organized militia, but our mainstream media and a lot of our politicians demonize them as white supremacists, as people who want to push this kind of white nationalism, because they don't want for anyone to threaten a ever expansive government who has the military at its will, who has police departments at its will. And so, again, to Blair White's point, to the extent that you allow for whomever is in charge to kind of change definitions and to demonize these people and to say that these people are a terrorist threat or this, that, and the other, if we as conservatives or people who are truthers or whatever you want to call us, if we are going along with that when it's politically expedient for us, then it becomes a question of, it becomes a question of, well, not a question, it becomes a fact, that well-established fact that, it's okay for one group or another to be demonized and dehumanized depending on who is in power, if that makes sense. So.
Yeah, it's a fine line where it's, I understand, because if someone's like mentally insane, literally insane, can't even walk, there's a slapping people on the street, I mean, then they committed a crime. It's going to be harder for them to get a gun. But in a perfect society, it's like, yeah, don't let that person have a firearm. But knowing how the government thinks half the country's, like, they think you're mentally ill if you just vote for Trump, or, if you like don't like Joe Biden, they think you have a problem. So it's a fine line and a slippery slope on that. And what you were talking about with me, I appreciate the compliment. I see things differently, where I think it's my civic duty to vote personally. Some people say don't vote. You cannot vote. I don't care. But I do want to vote for the better candidate. I like to research on a local level and pick people. Like, everyone complains about DAs in liberal cities, rightfully so. I don't live a place with a bad DA. I've moved there purposely, and I vote because I want to not turn it into Los Angeles or San Francisco. So I like to vote, but I don't think my civic duty ends there. For example, if the Republican Party infringes on the First or Second Amendment, but I like Donald Trump, I don't think it's my job to make excuses for it. I think it's my civic duty to stand up and say, no, you've gone too far too. Mm-hmm. And the Republican Party does a good job, just like the Democratic Party does, of being like, well, you don't want to vote for them, do you? And it's like, oh, heavens no. So then they use that as a cover. Like, for example, I tried to bring up this point. I don't care what you think about Ye, formerly known as Kanye West, or Nick Fuentes. I don't care if you like them or don't. That's your opinion. You have a right to do that. But what I tried to point out when Trump met with them is the Republican Party freaked out and they said Trump's Hitler or whatever. And I'm thinking to myself, you don't care when Trump meets with pharmacy lobbyists. You don't care when Mitch McConnell and Kentucky Republicans take $1 million from Pfizer. You know what I'm saying? So if you called it all ways, then I could have a little bit of respect. But you're more concerned with hate speech from a podcast than you are with politicians being swallowed alive by an industry that's, in my opinion, crushing the people. So there's a certain, the right, there's the old saying that they're just like Democrat lights, or they're on the same path, just going slower. That's how I see it. Yes, I vote for it, but I feel like if we don't stand up to our own party, as much as they talk the big talk against socialism, for free speech and Second Amendment, when you actually look at what they're doing, even when it's someone you like, they're weak. And even with the, I don't want to switch topics real quick because I want to get your thing, but with the border wall, I understand that Democrats block it. But if you can do an emergency and declare an emergency for COVID and print $6 trillion, that's not really legal. You had to do some sort of weird emergency executive order to do all that crap. Why can't you fill in the holes in the wall? To me, that's a national emergency. You could budget it with the military if you had to. And I don't see Republicans or Abbott really filling in the holes in the wall. So I like to challenge them instead of just being like, oh, they're better. It's like, who cares?
No, but everything that you're talking about with regard to challenging them, like that is your civic responsibility. The people are supposed to be a check on the government within their respective regions at the local level, state level, and the federal level. And the fact is, we're not providing that kind of check that our elected officials need for a number of reasons. Name or chief among them being that we are systematically dumbed down through public education. So we don't even understand what the function of government is. And so if you don't understand what the function of government is, how can you know that as a citizen, which is another word that we sleep on, we don't even know what that word citizen means. But as a citizen, you are, for all intents and purposes, your elected official's boss. And if you are not utilizing that power, if you will, by holding their feet to the fire, by having them account for the decisions that they've made, the things that they voted for, the bills that they're putting up, then again, you can't complain about the direction that your locality or your state or your country is going in if you're not basically taking the time and the effort to look into it. And so I think, once again, there is a lot of distraction that these words Democrat and Republican that they kind of harbor. People, one of the biggest trends that I see on social media, specifically on the right side of the political spectrum, is you have those who are truthers, who are deeply interested in what's going on with the economy and what's going on with war and what's going on with conspiracies that have been leveled against the American people for well over a century. There's people who are deeply interested in that. And then you have others who are conservative, who are genuinely conservative. They believe in traditional values, and that's the kind of thing that they talk about. They talk about traditional marriage. They talk about, gun rights, so on and so forth. All of the things that made America great historically. And then you have another corner of people who are just like a hawk watching what's going on with the left, and they can't wait to make another content video where they dig on something that the left did. Look at this Dylan Mulvaney guy who he thinks he's a girl. Isn't that funny? And they are always posting videos of this guy who thinks he's a girl because it gets them clicks, it gets them monetary revenue, so on and so forth. And so you have all those things happening. I'm not so much interested in that third group. I am, however, interested in those first two groups, those who are genuinely conservative and those who genuinely are genuinely interested in the truth, and kind of a cross between those two. The Republican Party politicians do not effectively represent those two groups. They just don't. This word Republican is conflated with conservatism and with the truth, but in reality, that's not the case at all. Like, these politicians get to hide under the banner of Republican, and all the while they're not doing anything in the name of conservatism and search for the truth. If you listen to, and I'll make this one point, I'll give it back to you, but if you listen to the interview that the late Barry Goldwater did with William F. Buckley, I think in the late 60s or early 70s, when he talked about the Senate and how Republicans in the Senate are just as eager to pass legislation as their Democrat counterparts. He equated them as being kind of one and the same. They act based upon impulse more so than the facts. And he said that if you're a responsible senator, you would take it slow, you would analyze the facts, and you will try to determine whether or not this is something that can be dealt with in the private sector before it even ever gets to the public sector. Because we, as senators, as congressmen, we have to operate within the confines of the Constitution. And nobody pays attention to what the government's power is and how it's supposed to be limited by the Constitution. We give the government as citizens unfettered power, and we don't check it. And so it to circle all the way back to how we started this live, this is the reason why these, Justin Pearson types and the media types have no shame in doing this kind of political theater, because they're more interested in emotion, because emotion yields votes. Emotion yields, politicians being elected who can reinforce and keep in motion this kind of global agenda that they have going on.
Yeah, when you said at the beginning, the three groups, like you have truthers that are into conspiracies, not conspiracy theories, but real ones that everyone can see are true, conservatives who like to hold the line. And then you said like reactionaries, I like to call them bobbleheads, because like a bobblehead just like sits there and you just like, it's like a little plastic thing. And you're like, do you agree with what that person did? And you just tap it and it goes, dink, 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 I like the bobbleheads, or like professional fans. And what I'm realizing is a lot of my peers, that's what they are. And I feel like a lot of the influencers have just turned into politicians. They hang out with politicians, they're friends with them. And although they're not all running for office, they just act like politicians. Mm-hmm. And, the narrative, I see how great the media and the left is at controlling the narrative. And this is something I've really tried to explain. Sometimes not so gracefully, people get mad. Other times I am graceful and people still get mad. But most people understand, where even if the left creates this Russia collusion narrative for 3 years and you fight against it, you're still living in their world. This whole Trump thing, it's massively helped Trump, the arrest. It's helped him so much in the polls. His whole team and his campaign members are bragging about it. It's created this whole new narrative where someone mentioned earlier that France is doing a protest at BlackRock, a mostly peaceful protest with a lot of fire. You have the banking situation, obviously the lockdowns, the big pharma corruption, the fact that the food supply is getting weirder and weirder, and we got to look at these laws because this is what we're eating and drinking. And even if you're right and you say the Democrats are framing Trump, which I think is in my opinion, I think they're overstepping. And honestly, whatever they're accusing Trump of, I read into it, is not even a top 1,000 bad thing that like anybody's done. Like they're doing a lot worse things in politics, including the Epstein list that disappeared that no one talks about. But it's like, even if you're defending Trump in that narrative, you're still living in that world. And that's why you're not a threat. That's why Democrats can do this for 2 years. And even if nothing happens to Trump, they still wasted your time and energy where you're not getting to the root of stuff. So it's been a difficult thing that so many of these influencers have turned into professional bobbleheads instead of conservatives or truthers. They're masquerading as conservatives and truthers, but they're just bobbleheads. And then you have the general public, where most Republicans at heart are either truthers or conservatives or a bit of both. But it seems as if, and I don't know if this is just the media perception or if this is true, that a lot of people are just getting dragged into these like narratives by the media, by Fox News, Newsmax, the influencers, to the point where they're not willing to call out their own side because they're kind of falling into this false paradigm of like, well, Joe Biden did that. And it's like, Joe Biden sucks. No doubt. I would vote for a rock over Joe Biden. It's like, where's that rock from? It's from Hawaii. It's a volcano rock. Does it talk? No. Does it print money? No. Does it infringe on my rights? No. I'll vote for the rock. I'll vote for, like, not the rock, a rock. I'm not talking about Dwayne Johnson. I'm talking about a literal sulfuric rock, or whatever.
Yeah.
So, but that's like the kind of mainstream narrative I'm starting to see. And, I'm not saying this stuff to be edgy. It's just like the Republicans, including Trump, they fuel off this stuff. And it's like, at the end of the day, how do you think we could get people to be like, listen, vote that way, support them? I'm not telling you to hate them, but really pay attention to what's going on and stop making excuses for these Republicans. Because I don't think they're stupid or getting fooled. I think they're just, playing ball like they have for like 60 years.
Yeah, they're definitely gullible, and they think it's inconceivable or unfathomable that the left, who have basically utilized and spent a lot of time studying the social sciences. So they understand, and I make this point all the time, they understand human kind of impulse. They understand peer pressure. They understand movement, social movement, and they understand how people kind of react to fear and anger. So they understand all this full well, and they've studied this for a very long time. Not only here in America, they studied it at the Frankfurt School in Germany. A lot of those professors came to the United States. If you look at a lot of the communist Comintern, you'll see how the Soviet Union, under the behest of Leon Trotsky, have studied the social sciences, the humanities, in such a way to, again, leverage the will of the people. First of all, to invoke the will of the people, which is essentially your own, right? To invoke or channel your ideology, your thoughts into the masses, and then call that democracy so that you can get what you want legislatively out of that and say, look, I have the numbers on my side. Never mind how I got the public to believe what I believe. Don't question that. Just understand that all these people who are protesting, they want action. You'll remember in the video from that protest in Tennessee, what are they saying with the bullhorn? No action, no peace, which is a threat of insurrection. No justice, no peace. This is a threat. If you don't give me what I define as justice, what I perceive as justice, if you don't take what I perceive as action, then you will not get peace. Well, what does that mean? Never mind what that means. Just know that you won't get it. Again, that's a threat. And so, again, when it comes to the so-called right, or at least the politicians, the Republican politicians, they think that all this stuff is just happening organically in the streets. They think that, the fact that our kids who are graduating from public schools and are wanting more of a Marxist utopia, they think that that's just the youth being the youth. Let's compromise and give them, let's meet them halfway there, but we're not really going to go all the way, and we're going to call that conservatism. It's not at all. And so they're constantly caught off guard. Some of them, others of them are actively involved in this because they genuinely believe it. Think Mitt Romney's father when he was in the Senate, and even Mitt Romney himself, who's in the Senate now. They call themselves Republicans or conservatives, but they're far from it. So,
well, with no justice, no peace, I always take it as a factual statement. If you live in these areas with Democrats, there's going to be no justice and no peace. I'm like, well, at least they're, it's not like they're like, oh, there's going to be no justice and no peace. And it's like, no. That's what happens when you guys take over legislature. We get no justice and no peace. But
exactly.
I'll say hold on, I'm trying to remember exactly where I was before that. I guess I'll remember when you kind of speak a little more, but what I was going to ask you before we ended it, and I'm not ending it now, but what's been on your mind recently? I know you're always working on stuff. You're always making your own content. I wanted to open the floor and just see what you've been passionate about the last couple of months.
Well, I mean, I've been thinking about a lot. Mostly I've just been, running my company here in Texas. As you know, we're making another film right now. I'm not as involved in this. I was just an interviewee.
Right.
It's called Comrade Yuri, about the interview that Yuri Bezmenov did, or that G. Edward Griffin did with Yuri Bezmenov. That documentary in particular is going to be a huge game changer. It kind of transcends politics, and it really kind of exposes the kind of game that's being played on folks who live in the West. While everybody is distracted, once again, as we talked about earlier, with the R and the D and the left versus the right, there's a lot of things that are happening in the world that is moving us in a direction for the worse. And for me, I'm not worried about it, but I do have a huge sense of concern for those of us, in the public who are eating, drinking, and being merry and have no idea what's going on kind of behind the scenes. And, there's a lot of money being funneled to Ukraine. There's a lot of money being funneled to Canada even. There's a lot going on in our country that, again, I just don't know how our children and how our children's children are going to basically withstand it, And so for me, I've been focusing a lot on curriculum, I'm making curriculum right now that studies the rise of social justice movements over the course of the 20th century.
Awesome.
This curriculum is going to be heavily focused on homeschool parents because there is a trend of people who are homeschooling their children in the United States. You saw this influx of people going that route after the so-called pandemic, and a lot of people have stayed the course. So I feel like in public schools, you learn a lot about Martin Luther King, you learn a lot about Helen Keller, you learn a lot about FDR, all these people that we're told are heroes. And the reality is, well, no, they were part of they were part of this thing that dismantled America, and we're celebrating these people as heroes. And so what I hope to do with my curriculum is to actually expose them for not being heroes, but actually being nefarious individuals, some deliberately, some not so deliberately, but basically analyzing and dissecting how a lot of these social justice movements have helped to bring the Western civilization to its knees more so than to advance Western civilization.
That's awesome. You're working on curriculum. I've been wondering who's going to do that. Multiple people should be doing it, building a more honest curriculum. That's great. With Comrade Yuri, I'm in it, right? Okay.
Yeah,
because I
definitely.
filmed in it because I was like, because he said I'm in it, and I'm like, I'm in it too. No, but yeah, I'll be in the. I can't. I'm so excited because like the whole G. Edward, Yuri Bezmenov stuff, I love it, and me, Chad, Justin, like we kind of came together over it. So I'll be in that doc as well. And what's his name? Philip from Josh Phillips, right?
Yeah,
Or Josh
Josh
Phillip.
Phillip.
Yeah, that's from Epic Times. That guy's awesome. Love that guy. It's going to be really cool. I remembered what I was going to say. I finally, because I was like, I did the same thing you did where I forgot. But the reason I forgot is because it's interesting when I do interviews because I'll listen back and I sound kind of goofy. But the thing is, when I'm the host, I got to listen to what you're saying, but I also got to be ready to pick it up. But sometimes when you're talking, I'm listening so attentively that I just, it's really good in a real conversation. But when you're hosting a podcast, it's not good to not have something next to say. But I'm like, wait, what I was going to say is I had a back and forth with this lady on Instagram, or maybe I just read her comment, and I'm not blaming everybody for it. Not every parent's like this or boomer. So don't, take this personally, but she,
are you a boomer basher?
No, I love boomers. It's just like I'm basically a boomer. I'm not really, but I act like one. I act like a grandma. So I'm, I'm like, get off my lawn, back the blue. I'm turning into a boomer. But
Nice.
no, this lady basically said, because I was saying no wonder why the conservatives are losing the youth and liberals are gaining them. She was basically like, whatever, it doesn't matter. This is always how it's been, An0maly. Like you're such a this, that, whatever. She was crying. Basically like, who cares that we're losing our youth? That's always how it's been. The youth always leans liberal. And the truth is, yeah, over time, people get more conservative naturally. I think that's just natural. But the thing is, you didn't always lose the youth. And I heard this quote one time. It's the best quote. A certain generation thought that they would send their kids off into the real world and the real world would wake them up, but instead they just turn the real world into liberal world, because that's what happens when you don't raise your kids and they're being raised by demonic media and education systems, etc. And for the record, learning really fake and watered down history, including myself, you learn that the heroes were the villains were the heroes. Sometimes you learn, like, you don't learn about people like Malcolm X because he talked about race in a way that's not politically correct, but even though he was pretty epic, he's very little talked about, and they consider him like violent and horrible. When you start to listen to his speeches, you're like, oh, I get it. He was saying liberals were deceitful and controlling groups. Like, that's why he doesn't get taught in history. So I think that's, not to be a hypocrite or too harsh, but this idea that it doesn't matter that the youth is like turning into like demonic culture is why it's lost in the first place. And I think that, assuming, and it's harder nowadays, like Disney, everybody's trying to propagandize your kids. So if you have this attitude of like, whatever, it doesn't matter. And it's like, how does it not matter? I didn't get that, but that was kind of weird.
Yeah. No, it's crazy. Like, if you look at opinion polls prior to the 1960s, you'll find that there was little difference of opinion between the youth generation and the adult society. On a number of different topics, drugs, sex, all sorts of things. The only difference of opinion was based upon region more so than age. In other words, college-educated youth had more quote unquote progressive view of the world than did youth who were brought up in more traditional families. And again, these numbers are well documented. You didn't really see this kind of breakaway from the opinions of the adult society until after the 1960s, going into the 1970s. And very little scholarship is done to analyze, well, why is that? Why was there this huge breakaway, this kind of division of the ages, so to speak, that we saw with the baby boomers? And I think it doesn't take more than just a little research to find that the late 60s happened to be this era of time where you had this kind of rebellious spirit that took hold of the youth. And again, Yuri Bezmenov talks about this in great length, where you had this kind of revolutionary spirit that a lot of the youth had. It showed up in second wave feminism. It showed up in civil rights. It showed up with the Black Panthers. It showed up with the hippie movement, the free love movement, um, such and so forth. Uh, it showed up also in American content and art. Uh, Mad Magazine challenged uh, the beliefs and the traditions of the adult society, called them old fashioned. This word cool became normalized. That which was part of the kind of subculture was considered cool, and that which was not was considered lame. And so, again, you saw this huge breakaway of the youth. And it's gotten to the point where now people believe, oh, the youth have always been rebellious. And the fact is, if numbers count for anything, then that's not the case.
Right.
Um, Again, the more, to your point, the more that we begin to surrender our children to the quote unquote real world, only for that real world to be headed in its institutions by leftists, whether it be the media, whether it be our colleges and universities, whatever the case may be. I mean, hell, you even have, this quote unquote criminal justice reform, right? Criminal justice reform is yet another excuse to take morality out of the criminal justice system. And what I mean by that is traditionally, if you commit a crime and you are found guilty by a jury of your peers, you have to suffer the punishment of having committed said crime. Now you have introduced into the factor all of these different excuses as to why you committed that crime. Maybe you came from a rough background. Maybe, you were poor. And so you needed to rob that store because how else were you going to feed your kids? And so you have all these different factors being played in the whole kind of criminal justice system or due process. And as a result, you see advocacy for shortening the length of time that one serves for having committed certain crimes. You see the releasing of criminals back into the streets only for them to commit more crimes. You see a whole number of things that are making the streets more and more dangerous, but they're doing it in the name of justice. They're doing it in the name of making the world a better place. And so all of these kind of progressive leftist ideas are utterly failing. But rather than taking a note from the failure of their ideas, we double down on them because our youth don't know how to think critically. They don't know how to look and analyze ideas for their merits. They go based purely off the emotions of them. So,
Right. And I always like now that I'm older, I fell for it when I was younger, but a lot of Republicans and libertarians, not a lot, but definitely libertarians more, they'll make some of the same sort of thought processes. And I'm trying to think to myself where it's like, being poor or being a different race, like it's almost makes you look crazier if you're like, oh, being poor and being that race means you have to do that. It's like, so you think that people of a certain race or a certain financial status are less moral, like they can't not do these like biblical principles, but it's actually super backwards when they try to make excuses. It's like the bigotry of low expectations. With the youth, I know most Republicans want to keep their kids away from it. So it's a very small percentage, but I do feel like a lot of like people are just like, whatever. And it's like, you really want to hand the youth to Satan and just say that's how it always is. First of all, it's not true. It wasn't always that way. The reason it became normalized is the reason the country's failing. And the fact that people don't get that is pretty bizarre. And you were talking about feminism. I saw a really funny meme today, and it said first wave feminism, we're as strong as men. Second wave feminism, I don't need no man. And then it was like third wave feminism, I am a man. And I was like, yo, I was like, low key though, high key, yeah, that's,
Yeah.
I don't need no man. I'm stronger than a man. I am a man. I'm going to beat you in basketball. You're like, damn, this all got out of hand real quickly. Anything last that you want to say, where people can find you, etc.? I want to cut this under an hour so it's easier to watch, but always a pleasure to have you. I'll definitely have you back. And yeah, when our documentary's out, we'll definitely show you. We're super excited on it. We made a Yuri Bezmenov doc with Justin Malone, others, and hopefully it's going to be the best doc of the year. We'll see.
Yeah, let's make it so. To get back to how we started the live with Justin Pearson, I think one of the things that people should pay attention to is the fact that, again, he comes from a communist background. This is documented. Not only that, but his father is a pastor. So there is, we joke about him sounding a lot like Martin Luther King in that speech, but there is a lot of similarities between this Justin Pearson guy and Martin Luther King, namely the fact that both of them are atheists and have fathers who are pastors. And so both of them kind of grew up in a context where they heard their fathers preaching. And so they understand the kind of oratory structure of preaching a sermon as if you are in a church. And so what Martin Luther King found is that I can be effective in getting churches in the South and across the country to go along with my civil rights movement if I sound like what their pastors sound like. Only I'm not actually preaching the gospel. I'm not calling people to come to repentance. I'm rather teaching social justice, and I'm teaching how we are supposed to basically demand that the government go this particular direction. And that's what salvation is. That's what the gospel is. He wrote a letter to Coretta Scott King saying, this is the gospel that I will preach, not what's in the Bible, but what is part of this kind of social justice movement that we're trying to do. And so, we make fun of this Justin Pearson guy, and rightly so. It's well merited. The dude is a straight clown. However, what he's doing is a continuation of this kind of civil rights, social justice movement type stuff that the general public genuinely thinks is harmless, that the general public genuinely thinks is only trying to bring the races together in harmony and peace and love. That's what the deception is. But the reality is it seeks to completely disrupt the basis of a meritocracy where everybody has the free will and right to utilize their talents, their skills in exchange for capital to take care of themselves and to take care of their families, regardless of race, regardless of sex, regardless of whatever the case may be. That's the true basis of a meritocracy. What these people want is something completely different. They want a utopia, a country wherein they are the ones who kind of sit at the top of the upper echelon of society. It's from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. Nobody owns property. That's what they want. And I think that people would serve themselves well in really analyzing and researching such people.
Right.
Instead
Thank
of
you.
falling for what they're doing.
Thanks for joining, Chad O. Jackson. Check him out on social media, and hopefully we can help with that process with the doc we're in this year. I think it's going to unveil a lot of that stuff. We're going to be out, folks. Thanks for listening to the Saturday episode of Dreamer Podcast. And real quick, folks, I'm going to play the outro like I always do now. And the God Bless hats, they're all made in the USA. they're getting harder and harder to get because a lot of the materials are hard to find, and they're good quality. Check them out. And when I wear my God is great stuff or my God bless hat, I always get the most compliments on my own stuff. And not only is it cool, and then I'll try to be like, hey, that's mine, you know, just like I'm like happy, but it's always usually religious people, God-loving people that are just, you know, starts a good convo. So check out that stuff, because it's getting harder and harder for me to even find this stuff. Nobody's making stuff in the USA anymore, and a lot of the materials, for some reason, maybe it's the economy or whatever, it's not easy to find the quality stuff. So thank you, Chad O. Jackson, for joining. Check him out on socials, guys, and he'll be on the show again, of course. Thank you for joining and being here, everyone. Hey, what's going on, my friends? Just a few ways to stay in touch and support if you'd like to. The first way is dreamrare.com. We have blue beanies, black beanies, pink hats, other colored hats, freedom versus tyranny shirts, Stay Blessed long sleeve, God is Great long sleeve, and lots of more cool items coming soon. Dreamrare.com. Check out the shop to support. Everything's made in the United States. Handpicked by me. Patreon.com/raretalk. For $5 a month, you can help support me, support the show. If you haven't noticed, unlike other channels, I don't work with very many sponsors, sometimes none at all. And part of the way I'm able to do that is with the dreamrare.com shop and patreon.com/raretalk. So thank you guys for keeping this show free, unimpeded, uninterrupted. I'm forever grateful. My free email list is stayintouchwithme.com. So check the links below in the description, or just type in on any browser, stayintouchwithme.com, all one word. You'll find my email list, put it in there, and it's the least annoying email list you'll ever be on. I barely use it because I don't like getting emailed every day or every week. It's annoying. So I don't do it. Stayintouchwithme.com. It helps me take back some power away from big tech. Telegram, t.me/dreamrarechat or @dreamrarechat. Due to censorship, I post all my live stream and videos there. Sometimes I have some bonus content, and I try to give people a heads up when Facebook or YouTube won't. DreamRareChat at Telegram. My Instagram is @DreamRare. Thanks for everybody following there for shorter content. And DreamRareLinks.com. That's DreamRareLinks.com. Has all my stuff. My podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, my music on Spotify and Apple, my Rumble page, my BitChute and Gab page. All my links are found at DreamRareLinks.com. Thanks for watching, folks. God bless you. You already know I'll be back with more.